is joining us tonight, I just want to say welcome to our C.A.S.T Community Awareness Night. We're absolutely thrilled to have you join us. And we are hoping to eventually transition this in the fall to in-person events, depending on how things go. So we're excited, though, that you get to join us from the comfort of your own homes. So my name is Ashley Moore. I am the Executive Director for C.A.S.T, Citizens Against Sex Trafficking, located in Washington County, Minnesota. And our mission at C.A.S.T is to empower our community to end sexual exploitation, which we do through prevention in the forms of education, awareness, and collaboration. And so tonight we are going to be talking about sexting, sextortion, and Minnesota law to understand what is this issue, what does the landscape look like, and really break down the reality from the myth, and just so that everybody has the facts that they need about this growing topic. And so a little outline for tonight. We're going to be spending time together till 8 p.m. and I'm going to introduce our incredible panelists. We're going to have brief definitions of what we're talking about tonight and then dive into a series of set questions to really dive in on a deeper level. And from there, we're going to have some time for Q&A as well. And so on the bottom of your screens, there should be a little Q&A button, and the same for panelists. If you want to click on that, just so that you have that open as we go through our time together, if any of those questions pop up that you feel like you can address while you're talking, any questions that we don't answer during that set question time, we'll try to cover during the time for Q&A. And so that's a little introduction into what we're going to be doing today. And now I'm going to introduce our phenomenal panelists. And real quickly though, Michelle, can you say something real quick just so that we know if it's working? Michelle, can you hear us? Having a technical glitch, so I will be with that in just a second here. All right, Michelle, we cannot hear you if you can hear us. Okay, she's going to take a quick peek on that. I'm going to introduce her right now as well. So Michelle Stark, Officer Michelle Stark is a patrol officer and has worked with the Oakdale Police Department for 22 years in various capacities. The last 14 years, Officer Stark has been assigned to the Community Affairs Office with the primary focus of community outreach and crime prevention. She has been trained in Power Over Predators program and has delivered presentations in human trafficking awareness to middle schools and classrooms throughout the Twin Cities. Officer Stark believes in a whole community awareness approach, which is essential to the prevention of sexual exploitation of minors. So Michelle, hopefully we can get the audio and we'll fix this little glitch here, but we are thrilled to have you join us today. And secondly, we have Rachel Tassley. So Rachel Tassley is a licensed social worker. She earned her license in 2015 and her master's in social work in 2019 from Fordham University with a concentration in neurodivergent adolescents. She has a trauma-based cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT certification, as well as grief counseling certification. She has spent 4 years applying her degree and licensure in the public schools, working directly with students through Ohio Guidestone. Rachel has a heart for youth, which she demonstrates through her work as well as her ministry, mentorships, and as a teacher of dance for youth in her neighborhood. So Rachel, welcome. We're thrilled to have you join us tonight. And finally, we have Scott Haldeman. Scott Haldeman graduated from Purdue University in 2004 and Hamline University School of Law in 2007. He worked at the Attorney General's office between 2008 and 2016, where he spent 4 years handling civil commitments of sexually dangerous persons and 4 years prosecuting Medicaid fraud. Between 2016 and 2020, he worked in Adult Prosecution Division of the Haldeman County Attorney's Office, where he prosecuted violent crimes such as homicide, criminal sexual conduct, assault, and robbery. He started working with the Washington County Attorney's Office in January of 2020 and became the director of the East Metro Human Trafficking Task Force in June of 2021. So we are thrilled to have you join us, Scott. Thank you so much. And so tonight, as I mentioned before, we are talking about sexting, sextortion, and Minnesota law. And so I wanted to kickstart with just definitions that everybody understands the working definitions of what we're talking about. And if any of our panelists would like to jump in and add to those based off of your experience, you are welcome to do so. But when we talk about sexting, the definition, there's quite a few different definitions, but the general consensus is that it is the sending, receiving, or forwarding a form of digital media, such as an image, video, text, email, and so forth, with sexual characteristics or of a sexual nature. A common example of this is somebody texting someone else a nude image of themselves. Sextortion, on the other hand, escalates it, and it is the threat to expose a sexual image in order to make a person do something or for other reasons, such as revenge or humiliation. It's also the threat to expose sexual image to coerce victims to provide additional pictures, sex, or other favors. And so when we're talking about these issues, I'm going to dive into kind of our first question here. And so any panelist is welcome to dive in and kind of kickstart this here. But really, based off the definitions, what is the current landscape? Is sexting a problem? Is it a reality? Is it popular? And if so, why is it popular among teenagers? If anybody wants to speak into that to begin with, please do so.
I'll go. So yeah, it's very popular right now. So much so that it's almost become like a normal thing, a normal milestone that a lot of teenagers hit. Unfortunately, the why they're doing it is, I mean, when they say they don't know, that's a very accurate answer. They don't know. Their decision-making skills and long-term consequence, like sensors, aren't fully developed. So they have no idea that sending that single image could result in getting them kicked off a sports team, to making them not get accepted to a college, all the way to possible criminal activity. So yeah, it's still really popular. I think with media being almost hypersexual, it's become so normal. You see it in TV shows, you see it in movies, you hear it in songs that there's thousands of examples of basically sexting in media, and they're just bombarded with it every single day.
And when you say it's kind of a milestone, can you break down what that means?
Yeah, so it's obviously it's like a fictitious, it's not a milestone we want them to reach, but between the ages of like 11 to 14 is when sexting, most teenagers, if they're going to start sexting, it happens in that time. And so it's almost like hitting this sexual awareness milestone that a lot of teenagers view as safer because it's not in person. So a lot of the kids that I have worked with at the high school, I mean, this was almost a consistent issue across all of the high schoolers that I did work with. They would tell me that they felt like by doing it over the computer, or over the phone, or over an app, that there was less likely that they would get in trouble or get caught by it.
And I would just add to that, I mean, the access is just so easy. I mean, everybody's got a phone, everybody's got a phone with a camera. Gone are the days of taking a photo, bringing it to a store, getting it developed, and sending it out. I mean, the access is unbelievable. And I think with that comes, like what Rachel's saying, just the inability to be responsible with that sometimes, or understand what the consequences of what you're doing. I mean, when you take a picture and send it out, you lose complete control of that picture. It can go to anybody, and whoever you send that to, they can send that to anybody, and it can become quite a cascade. So yeah.
Yeah. And what is the Minnesota law regarding this? I know for some people, they attribute this to child pornography. There's a lot of conversation around that. What's the official law regarding sexting, sextortion, that piece of it?
Yeah, so there's no specific law against sexting, but it can fall under other certain statutes. And when you're speaking of child pornography and things like that, that's what we're talking about. Minnesota law obviously prevents or criminalizes possession of pornographic work involving minors, and a minor is defined as somebody 18 years or younger. So anybody who disseminates a pornographic picture it can be guilty of a crime, and anybody who possesses a pornographic picture of a minor also can be guilty of a crime. These penalties increase if that person is under 13 years of age. So dissemination and possession is prohibited. Minnesota statute also prohibits use of minors in a sexual performance. So it's unlawful for any person to promote, employ, permit, or encourage a minor to perform in like a sexual act in a performance or something like that. And I think one of the main takeaways from those two statutes is that the way they're worded, they define it as a person. There's no age. There's no age factor or age thing that prevents. So if somebody's 15 and they're receiving a picture encouraging somebody to send a picture from another 15-year-old, that doesn't exempt them from any liability. It's more of a prosecutor's discretion as to how to kind of treat that crime. But technically, it would be a crime to possess a pornographic picture of a minor or to have a video or something like that. In my experience, and I've spoke a little bit to the juvenile attorneys in our office too, I think it's rare for some of that, but not impossible, but rare for that situation to get charged criminally if it's too, like a boyfriend and girlfriend type situation, and they're doing that, and that's found. And I think one reason is because it's hard to detect. I mean, it's not going to be found normally. Where it usually turns into something that's criminal is when we're talking about sextortion, like you're saying, or dissemination of images without somebody's permission. So I think that's where it really ratchets up to where it is a crime, and this is a separate statute I'm talking about. It's called non-consensual dissemination of private sexual images, and as you said earlier, it's a crime to kind of give out. It's a crime to give out image of another who's depicted in a sexual act when that person is identifiable, and they should reasonably know that that person does not want to consent to that dissemination. So that's what you were kind of talking about earlier, where it's I have this picture of you, and I'm going to use it against you, and I'm going to send it out to other people. I'm going to embarrass you. I'm going to do these things to you. If you don't do something for me, I'm going to send this out. Sexual extortion was actually there's no definition, or there's no crime for that up until this year. Kelly Moeller is a state representative, and she's in the 42A district, District 42A in Shoreville, and I worked with her at the Attorney General's office and Hennepin County as well. And she's really a big advocate for victims' rights in this area, and she's authored a sexual extortion statute that's going to go into effect August 1st of 2021. And that criminalizes that threat to disseminate private images of somebody else, and a threat to expose information unless they provide some kind of sexual contact for them, service for them. So it's a lot of information, but again, in summary, sexting itself is something that's not illegal, but it can fall under several other items that would make it illegal.
Thank you for sharing that. That is a lot of information, but it's a lot of good information. And especially, it sounds like it's really a relevant conversation. Policies coming out in the next 2 weeks or so here. So with it being, a rising issue, something clearly in conversation with policymakers, with school counselors, and the like, there's certain studies that are coming out that's saying up to 40% of children have either sent or received a nude image by the age of 14. What are some of the consequences? We talked about kind of rational thinking, and that piece of their brain hasn't fully developed, so they don't necessarily know why they might do this. But what are some consequences that they should consider if they choose to engage in this? Like, what are some of the consequences that could happen if they choose to give out their image to someone else?
I can't speak to the criminal consequences, but mental health wise, there are a ton. There's just a plethora of comorbidity with participating in sexting. And the risk of those mental health issues is greater at the earlier age of starting these sexual activities. The two most obvious ones are depression and anxiety. A lot of times that can go hand in hand with participating in any sort of social media. There's a concept that's been tossed around called the like factor, which plays a part in sexting of I want to be liked. I want that serotonin boost of someone telling me that I'm pretty, or someone hitting that thumbs up button. And that just is sexting is a very far branch of that, of seeing that person's reaction when you send it to them, or getting your reaction when it's being sent to you. But it can go so much more deeper than that. There's a lot of times sexting is tied with eating disorders or addiction later in life. There was a study by Kaiser Permanente that talked about early childhood and early to late childhood adverse experiences, and sexting is on that list, or early sexual exposure. And like I said before, the earlier the age, the more chances you have to have more, like a higher ACE score, which is the adverse childhood experience score. So participating in any sort of way before the age of 15 counts towards that ACE score, which could lead to like addiction later in life. And then I'm gonna bring it up, but unfortunately, another issue really closely tied to sexting is suicide, especially I've seen a lot of times teens commit suicide because they see that there is the path in front of us, and then there is the choice to not live anymore, and that's the only two paths that they can see. And a lot of times in the sexting or sextortion cases, they see that the only way to get out of that is to not be living anymore.
I think some of the studies have shown too that those who sex are 5 times more likely to attempt suicide. And that was, I believe, from the 2019 Minnesota Student Health Survey for at least the Minnesota high school students too. So it does have very lasting implications. And so as community members, or if you're a parent or a caregiver, speaking on the emotional and psychological side of this conversation with you, Rachel, maybe, and Scott, feel free to contribute as well if you feel like there's some pieces there that are relevant here. But like, what can parents do to try to help mitigate some of these risks? I mean, it's all, if the majority of it's happening through your own phone, what can a parent do to try to say, hey, how do I protect my child?
Well, first of all, I'm not a parent, so take that with a grain of salt. So I can only give advice to what I've seen work with the families that I've worked with. And I can't imagine how much more emotional weight there is if you are a parent and your child is participating in sexting. And it's different from a therapist's point of view, because I can see solutions. And sometimes parents just have that emotional attachment to the connection or to the situation, and it's hard. I think the gut reaction is to just monitor everything all of the time, but that can sometimes backfire, especially with older teenagers, because they have that, they don't have good decision-making skills yet. And so they're more likely to push back against harsh rules that are set. So a really big one is just education, telling them straight up, if you send these pictures, here are some consequences that could happen. They can't think through these consequences on their own. So you have to spell it out for them. You have to say, this, if you send this, this could happen. If you send this, this could happen. If you're in possession of a photo or a text, this could happen. Consequences from the school level to the friendship level to, all the way up to a state level. If it does happen, and like Ashley said, 40% of teens have sent or received a sext before the age of 14. I had a family that handled this in such a beautiful way. Like, I wanted to write a book on it. When their daughter was caught sexting by the school, I was brought in and we just had a meeting with the parents. Most importantly, the parents stayed calm through the whole thing, and there was absolutely no shame put on either student. And I think that is a huge thing to remember, because it's so easy to just say, don't do that, and not tell them why or how to not do it. And teens can feel shame for literally anything nowadays. So to remove that shame right off the bat, these parents did such a beautiful job of really calmly talking to their kids. So they had a discussion. They took their daughter home. They had a discussion on it. It wasn't a long discussion. It was like 20 minutes, and it wasn't emotionally driven. I can imagine the parents were feeling anxiety towards the situation, and I know the teenager was feeling anxiety about the situation, but they kept it short. And then this is just it blew my mind, but it worked so well. After the conversation, they had her call a friend and they all went out to dinner. They normalized that this is something that could happen, but it's also not the end of the world. they caught it at a very early stage, and they were able, it was with a peer, which is also a big deal, because with levels of sexting, if it's peer-to-peer, it's a little bit easier to handle than if it's peer to, or like child to stranger or child to adult, unfortunately. But yeah, they normalized that this can happen, and they still loved their daughter, and that nothing was going to change within their family because of this, and that it was just a situation, and they're moving on. And I worked with both the parents and the kid in that situation. And in session, you know, a lot of feelings came out, and there was a lot of like worry, and did we do this right? And what does mom and dad think of me? But that family as a whole, I think it should just be the poster family for how this is handled. They did such a good job at it.
So to kind of recap that a little bit. So for parents, one, if you can provide guidance and structure for children, helping them understand the consequences for them, spelling it out. You know, if you send your image, there's no guarantee that that person you sent it to won't share it with their friends. And, you know, or do you want the whole school to see that image of your body? Like, are you comfortable with anybody seeing that? Because once you send that image out, that person gets to have the control of it. Having a conversation in a calm way, regardless of how you might be feeling internally, but just really reaffirming the value of your child, that they are worthy of love, that they are worthy to be treated with dignity, just reaffirming some of those pieces and saying, you know, like, sexual urges are normal, but here's some safer outlets. Giving this power to somebody else may not be the best option right now. And so really having those conversations and having an open dialogue with your child can also be a useful tool. And then also just, again, those fundamental messages of just, here are the consequences, here are the realities, help rational thinking, but then also the emotional support of you are worthy of love, you are worthy of value, and just really supporting your child emotionally. Does that seem like a fair recap?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for sharing. And then kind of for families that might be in a situation where their teen is currently sexting and they're not sure how to go about handling this topic. They're not sure how to, you know, especially like what are the potential legal implications, or especially as they get to like 16, 17, 18 years old, or just starting kind of on that cusp of, you know, growing into adulthood. We've received feedback of parents being like, well, how should I say something to police about this? Is this something that I need to talk to them about it? Like, this person's sending my daughter images, this person's sending my son images. What would you kind of respond to that? I know there might be various factors such as strangers or adults engaging with a minor or peer-to-peer, but what are some of those? How should parents handle that response if their teen is currently in that position?
Well, you know, certainly, and maybe is Michelle, is she, yeah, maybe she can go about, I mean, I think she's probably more in tune with the investigation part of things, obviously, and what kind of on that end of it.
All right, Michelle, can you hear us?
I can now, and I'm so very sorry for the interruption and the disturbance with my technical skills. My partner, Ryan Stewart, as many of you know, is much more savvy technically. This shouldn't have been a problem today, so I do apologize. So yes, please, and I apologize if I reiterate anything that you've already previously stated, because I can hear that you're speaking very eloquently about it. Make sure that you have that relationship and that dialogue and the rapport to be able to connect with your child to say, yes, this is happening, and we need to report this to the police, or we need to get additional resources. Block that person who is, especially if it's been unsolicited and these folks come up really random and there may be catching on to some vulnerabilities. Block those folks. monitor the child's activity as closely as possible, have that contract, written or verbal, however it is with them. And if you at some point say, oh, you know, we didn't start a contract, I feel like I'm violating my child's space or whatever, start anew tomorrow. You know, if they want a new cell phone or a new device, say, hey, you know, this is my responsibility to keep you safe and manage this device. And so now we're going to start a contract if you want a new phone. And I'm going to be watching and monitoring what's being said and done. But for sure, we want to maintain if they're getting messages or if they've been enticed or groomed and that's been evolving, we want to save that evidentiary images, text messages on the phone. So typically we say if we're trying to avoid or not engage, delete it, end the conversation, block it. But if it has expanded to the point where we need to look at things more thoroughly on the device or assist you in that investigation, we want to keep those messages and those images on there for evidentiary purposes. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to touch on that too. I think, you know, the jurisdictions I've worked with, you know, there's a savvy person with the tech stuff and how this works in every jurisdiction. And, you know, I get, you know, people, a lot of times I think people are afraid of bringing something to the police or bringing something to an investigator because they don't know what the consequences will be. Or they don't go down that path. And then, you know, sometimes it just becomes too late if that doesn't happen. And I think I can, you know, the people in the positions that are helping the kids with this and the prosecutors in position, I mean, you know, there's discretion there as far as when is something like this criminal, when is something like this not, and when should it be treated as a social thing or something else. And it's always good to, when something like this has happened, and it just doesn't seem, you know, something doesn't seem right. And a lot of this is common sense, right? I mean, if you know, if it doesn't seem right to reach out and to get the help before it becomes too late and you get to some of these later consequences that you can't come back from. And so I think, you know, everybody has people who are experienced in this now and have seen enough of these where you can look at it and say, okay, well, I'm you know, I always like to say if I get a call from an officer in any case and like, well, I wasn't sure if I should send this case up or not. I'm like, well, no, always send it up because I think it's always good for somebody else to review it. And if it's not a crime, it's not a crime. And we all get information and better information going forward on those things. So and from an evidentiary standpoint, absolutely. I mean, the way, if it becomes very serious and we're talking about a prosecution, a crime, the easiest way for us to prosecute somebody who is extorting your child or something like that is to have those text messages, have those evidence. I think sometimes the easiest thing to do is for a kid to delete that stuff because they're embarrassed, they don't want it to be seen, anything like that. But that makes it harder for police and others, you know, that to recover those things and to be able to successfully prosecute these things and to hold the people responsible. They need to be held responsible.
I think that's kind of an important point of this is, you know, some you guys touched on is just that teenagers might feel embarrassed about this and might start deleting the information or the evidence. And that's where these conversations and having these dignifying conversations, but real conversations with your kids are important. The reality is that, you know, you can ask most teenagers and they know of somebody who has either sent or received a nude. Like they've heard of it if they haven't done it themselves or somebody they know. It's at school all the time. It's a reality that they're facing. And so if you meet them where they're at and just say, hey, we need to have a real talk. If you find yourself in this situation, here are some tools you can do. You know, for power of predators, we talk about, you know, if somebody says, hey, I'm going to sextort, you know, either send me another image or sleep with me or do this, that, or the other, or I'm sending your image to your entire family or to your entire school. You know, what do you do as a teenager? Because you can feel trapped, partly kind of what Rachel talked on, because your brain hasn't fully developed that rational, how do I solve this problem part of their brain yet. One thing we talk about with students is say, take a snapshot of that conversation and let that person know, hey, I just took a snapshot of this. So if my image is revealed to other people, I'm bringing this to law enforcement and shows that you had intent to distribute my photo. And it's like all of a sudden, even just giving those practical tools to a student can be like, okay, I flipped like I turned the tables on this and I feel like I have some semblance of control. But for parents, having this conversation and giving them that practical tool of saying, if you're in this situation, don't delete that information. Come talk to me. I love you. You matter more. And you matter more than the consequences. You matter more than the drama, more than the fear. You matter most. And I think that's what a lot of students need to hear is just like, here's the step-by-step how I handle this. But to know that, you know, there isn't shame in being honest about a situation because we're here to love and help one another.
Right. And I feel also that adults have such a hard time also sharing. And then we're expecting our children to share those sensitive, embarrassing, difficult to speak about things. And the adults are having hard times when they're becoming sexually extorted by another adult or someone else. And so really, we have a lot of empathy and really take these cases seriously because they're heart-wrenching for many. And the embarrassment alone for adults, for children and teens, 100 times worse for them to come up with, this is what's happening and I'm afraid or I'm scared and things have now left control and I don't know what to do. So I think the reassurance that speaking to the police about it, even at a baseline, figuring it out, where to go from here, and that you know, we kind of go with what's comfortable for people, unless it's very, very, you know, it's criminal and we need to press charges. We're going to push that. But really, we want to talk and get you through this. We want to unwind whatever's occurring in their lives. And, you know, meeting police officers and getting out to talk to folks to say, this isn't a scary thing. You can talk to us with the same amount of care and concern, whether it's the student themselves, the teenager, or parents. Reach out to us because we're happy to have those conversations with you and discuss some options and get you moving in the right direction.
So we've talked a little bit about like peer-to-peer and we've talked a little bit about strangers or adults a little bit. One of the questions we have are the majority of these instances peer-to-peer, and how and where are the most common places students counter predators online?
I can talk a little bit. I will say, quick caveat, I am Ohio, so I know like the Ohio regulations and Ohio answers for schools, and I don't know the Minnesota ones. So this is all just coming from my personal experience. A majority of the teens that I have worked with that have had situations with sexting were peer-to-peer. I would say, thinking back through all the years, I had one instance where she wasn't 100% sure the person she was conversing with, like who their identity. Obviously, one is more dangerous than the other. When you don't know who you're sending things to, that poses a much larger danger because it could be the 14-year-old boy that he says he is, or it could be a grown man. And there are a lot more dangers that come along with situations like that. But the peer-to-peer instances, those are also dangerous because a lot of times it may say a screen name, but it's not necessarily that person behind that screen name. It could be a friend or, you know, anybody. Just because you know who the screen name is supposed to be attached to doesn't mean that that is in the hands of that person at that moment when that is sent. There are a lot of apps that do allow regulations to them that I find that parents really don't know about. YouTube and TikTok and Snapchat do have parental guidance controls on them where you can go into the settings and you can change what your child is able to see or send. You can even set some apps to where, I believe it's Snapchat specific, if they send a photo, you also get it to your phone. So that's an an extra, safety net if your child is trying to not sext or has been in a situation and you're trying to work your way out of it. That may be a nice safety net. So just to hold them accountable and also hold yourself accountable to have those conversations. But there's also really, really bad apps. One in particular I can think of is called Kik, K-I-K. There's absolutely no regulation to it. You only need to put in an email address, create a screen name, and have a first and last name, and they don't check any of it. You could make it whatever you want. When I was looking up a few things, and out of curiosity, I wanted to see how easy it was, and I, in under 4 minutes, created a fake email and signed on to Kik as a fake name that wasn't my own. So it's really quick, it's really easy, and there's no regulation of who you're talking to. You can send messages to anybody, you can send photos to anybody. And at further reading with Kik, if you delete it on your end, it's not deleted on the other person's end. Once it's sent for good. So I would say beware of that one in particular. Yeah, that's probably, I think, the worst one. But again, I think I mentioned it before, that just the hypersexual media is, regulating what your kids see can be important, or at least talking about what your kids see. I know a lot of my dancers that I work with, they are on TikTok, and I follow their TikToks. I want to make sure what they're posting is okay, and who's commenting on it. And I brought stuff up to parents before when I said, when I thought this could potentially be a dangerous situation. Most counselors are taught harm reduction, so we just want the least amount of damage to take place. And if that's a hard conversation, if that's setting up parental guidelines, anything parents can do so that the least amount of damage takes place.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think kind of bouncing off of what Rachel's saying too, like if there is an internet access to anything, there can be a predator. Like I've had online Scrabble and I've gotten solicitations on Scrabble. Like it's everywhere. And so it's, again, you can do all the right protection wear, you can do all of those right steps, but if you have those real conversations with your child and help them understand the consequences and the realities of this issue of, when you send that image, you don't get that image back. Here's how you can protect yourself is by not starting. That's some of the stuff that helps with the prevention to begin with. But all of these additional tools and parental guidances are just one extra buffer to help you protect your child too. So both are necessary, both are in good combination with each other as well.
Yeah, I think what Rachel said about the chat room regulation is extremely important. I mean, know what your kids what apps they're using, because the apps with the safeguards that Rachel's talking about are much different from apps like Kik, and we've seen things on like a Whisper is another one, Discord. These are those apps that, as Rachel was saying, I mean, people can create these fake using over IP phone numbers, so their phone numbers can't be traced. It's essentially a person you have no idea who it is. I mean, when you look at and you pay attention to those apps and see what they're about and what you need to do to get on them, compared to some of the more mainstream ones, that's the times when you kind of need to start worrying, or not worrying, I should say the wrong word, but to be more concerned about what your child and what they're doing with their internet time.
I have to agree with all of that, in the fact that there's no safe place on the internet. And I'm sure you've said this already earlier. Every app has a server, and so that is information regardless if it's deleted. And as Rachel said, the end user may still receive the information or have access to the information, so it's always out there, and that should always be reiterated with any application. Even the common ones that you determine you feel are safe or you're comfortable with your child, those need to be monitored also. There is no safe place.
And that includes video games as well, not just apps on your phone, but also Xbox 360, like all of it. Any outlet to any internet server can be a potential outlet for a predator to use. But we have a question here too. Where do you go to find these apps? Is there a document out there? Is there kind of an overview or a list of parental guides? Any tools or resources like that that you all know about?
I've just found if you straight up Google, how do I, how do I set parental controls on TikTok, or how do I set parental controls on Snapchat? Someone out there has done it, and there's like YouTube videos, and it gives you step-by-step instructions. And I mean, sit your kid down and go through their phone, ask them what apps are, ask them what this does. That is just a fun way to see what your kid likes to do, or what, addicting games are out there. But also it's a good way to look through your kid's phone without breaking that, still giving your kid privacy, because you're doing this together as a family activity. But you're building that connection and building that trust if your kid downloaded something they might not have wanted you to see. That's a good calm place for them to be like, yeah, I have Kick. And you can bring, oh, I've heard about this. Tell me who you talk to. What do you do? And then maybe that's a good place to start. I don't know if that's the best app for you. And then, start having those conversations instead of just taking the phone, looking through it and deleting stuff and, not knowing. I know I've seen some of my cousins' cell phones, and I have no idea what half the apps are. I wouldn't even know what to delete or anything like that. But yeah, someone out there has set the controls, and they will walk you through it.
A few years ago, we put out like the 15 apps to be aware of. However, it is changing all the time. And even since we put out that publication, there are more apps out there that are concerning, and even the common ones in the wrong place and time with folks can be really serious and dangerous. So just agreed. Have those early conversations, and the earlier better. Before they even get the device, have those conversations and start setting the ground rules on what the expectations are, and having that just common conversation, heartfelt with your children or your student, that what can happen, and that your conversations about that is a safe place and a communication tool, that if should something go wrong, we're here. Or the trusted adult is here to go through that with you. So, but there is the 15 apps out there. You can Google it and get them, or you can request a resource. But again, it's ever changing. And I'll continue to reiterate that there's no safe app out there.
One thing I've heard from some parents too is kind of going off of what both Michelle and Rachel have said is, because it's ever changing, they're like, well, I looked at the list and then this new app popped up. It might just be more effective for you to have those conversations and that bonding time with your kid to see their interests and have them show you what's on their phone, and then go back and Google each one to see what are the risks, do a little bit of your own research into it. What are the parental guides? That way you can kind of custom tailor your own protection guide for your child based off of their interest versus a generic sheet that misses the new 3 or 4 apps that came out in the past few weeks. So it might be easier to do it that way. And then also kind of bouncing off of what Michelle has said too, of just being that safe space for your child to land, for parents kind of being like, where is my safe space? One of the questions that we had here too, so like first in school and out of school, like are school counselors trained to help families with this? And if so, or if not, like where do parents turn for resources if they discover their kid is sexting outside of school? Like are school counselors only for in-school support? Is this for family support? And if a parent's like, I feel really not equipped to handle this right now, or I don't know how to approach this specific situation, who do I turn to for help? Like, is there a specific person in the police department, a specific person at school? Who are the specific people they should kind of turn to for that support?
As far as the police department, anybody at the police department, a police officer, can get you in the right direction to find additional resources and have that foundation to get you moving in the right direction. And then just that comfortability to reach out to your resources. I find that again, it's so difficult for folks to contact the PD, and we are your resource. Use us, call us. If we don't have the answers, we will reach out to the county attorney's office. We will find you resources. I love NECMEC, NetSmarts, those things that can help you start those conversations, or even what am I looking for, the red flags, what have you. But we'll push you to those resources. If there's not someone specialized at that time and place that you call, will get you in the right direction. So it may be just a starting point. It may be professional services and counseling that we can reach out to or refer you to. But we will do the best we can to answer those questions and put you in the right direction.
Again, I live in Ohio, so I can't speak to Minnesota, but in Ohio, a school counselor sets the schedules and does this like school administrative work per student. A school psychologist is there to do like the testing and work with learning disabilities. And in Ohio, we have a school therapist. So that was my role. So it didn't matter if the sexting took place in school or outside of school. If I was working with that child, then it was important. So if there's resources like that in Minnesota, and I'm sure even in Minnesota, a lot of the school counselors or psychologists have those resources to refer out to outside therapists. It's great just to have somebody on your side that's gonna, help keep parents calm and also, normalize the situation, because unfortunately, it's a normal situation. This happens a lot.
And I do work with schools in the past, and I can tell you from a Minnesota Twin Cities perspective, school counselors, there's also growing mental health support teams at different schools. So it varies depending on which school district and which specific school your child might be in. But normally a school counselor will have the appropriate resources, regardless if it is taking place inside or outside of school. And so if you need somebody to talk to about this, a school counselor at your school that focuses on the mental health or the mental health support team, either one of those would be good resources, regardless if it's taking place inside or outside the school building.
And just to kind of piggyback on what Michelle was saying, one thing I've really come to like about working in Washington County is I think because of the smaller size, I mean, you really, I haven't been here too terribly long, but to be able to get in and work with law enforcement on a really almost personal level and to have kind of that open line of communication, I think that's so important, as Michelle was saying. If we have a question about the legal implication of this, it really is as simple as just picking up the phone and calling. I mean, we always have an attorney that's on duty at all times. And now that I've been in this different area that's a little more specialized in trafficking, the ability to kind of connect with the law enforcement in different jurisdictions and to talk these things out to really find some of the best solutions, I think has been really great. So, and also if something does become criminal, our office has really wonderful victim advocates that work with victims of these things to help get them through and to provide them resources, and are really skilled in the different options that are available for victims.
Thank you. We have another question here. Well, I'll also mention too, one of our attendees is a school counselor, and she says that they are very well equipped and willing to help find resources too. So that extra affirmation that yes, school counselors can help. So thank you for sharing that. We have another question here, and that is, what is the right age to start these conversations? And do any of them happen in the schools? We can have the panelists start kick with that.
I don't think there is a right or wrong age to start it. If the topic comes up, if you feel like it's a good time, absolutely start the conversation. And this conversation doesn't have to start with, explaining to your child what sexting is and sending nude images. You can start a conversation at the age of 3 about consent and your body. And I think a lot of times people hear the word consent and they automatically just jump to sex. And it's not. Your body is your own. So consent can start with a high five. That's how we teach it to kindergartners. I ask kindergartners, can I give you a high five? Would you like to receive a high five? And then it's that option for them to say, no, I'm good. I don't want to be touched at the moment. Or like, yeah, I do want a high five. So it can start really young with things with topics like consent, or it can start with like privacy. again, I've seen a lot of parents that, and this is just from my experience, it could be different everywhere, but parents think privacy is an all or nothing deal. You either have no privacy or you have all of the privacy in the world. And it's not. You can, you decide what level of privacy and which areas are right for your family and your kid. So those conversations can start really, really young. And then having that level of trust and comfort and talking about those difficult topics then makes it when they're 11, 12, 13 and sexting comes up, it's no longer this like weighted conversation because we've been talking about it for so long that now this is just another level to what mom and dad have always told me. So there's no right or wrong age. As long as you're having the conversation, it's the right age.
I chime in to agree there. Starting out with healthy, safe relationships, identifying as they're getting older who predators are, what those behaviors look like, and then just continuing early on before the devices become integrated into their social information sharing should be a buffer, like Rachel said. So the earlier the better. 8 years old is sometimes when these things start happening, especially with folks giving their children devices earlier and earlier, and the different way they can launch online with different devices. So earlier the better, softer the better.
I have nothing to add. I think that was really well put by both Michelle and Rachel.
Yes, and to kind of answer the second portion of that question, so there are certain pieces of the curriculum for schools that in Minnesota that are mandated to share like what is sexual abuse, but there is not a mandated sexual exploitation curriculum. So it might talk about like what domestic violence might look like or sexual abuse might look like, but the only state currently in the US that mandates the full sexual exploitation prevention curriculum within the schools is Florida, and some other states are starting that conversation. Minnesota is just on the cusp of that, and so there are curriculums such as Power Over Predators, which both myself and Michelle are certified to present. C.A.S.T, we teach that curriculum to youth groups, to schools, to community groups. There's also like Youth Aware with Act United over on the west side of the metro, and they also go into schools, and we're all trying to continue to increase our reach because this is really valuable information, and it's all conducted in an age appropriate way for middle school and high school students. And I think that's another important piece when having kind of that conversation and that dialogue, is doing it in an age appropriate, matching them where they're at, because that's also the conversation of like, starting early with consent and like high fives, hugs, your body, and then kind of going into a situation where it's like you now have a piece of technology, how do you handle that safely and responsibly? And then going into, predators don't have an age limit. They don't wait to start preying on people. And so if you have certain outlets that increase the risk of your child, kind of gauge it based off that as well. But we want to get into the schools more. And so that's something that for families, what you can do, start talking to your teachers, your PTAs, your schools, saying, hey, we want to have this curriculum reach our students. I think the biggest pushback is that a lot of parents are uncomfortable because they think, oh, my kid's a good kid, they don't do that. And it's not about being a good kid or bad kid. It's about people growing and developing, and predators knowing exactly where they're at in their development stage and preying on them. And so it's not about being a good kid, bad kid. It's just about being safe. And so that's one thing we want to encourage, is if you want to advocate to get these types of curriculums into your school, we would love to join in on that. As of right now, though, there's no sexual exploitation prevention curriculum that encompasses all of it, such as the healthy versus toxic relationships on top of sexual abuse, trafficking, sexting, sextortion. There's no curriculum yet mandated for that in Minnesota. Right.
I agree. I would start with your lead health teacher who's doing that type of training and teaching in your district, and have that discussion with them and the superintendent, and if you would like that in your child's education and curriculum. So that's where we have been requested in the past. It's through the health department in the school. So that's an avenue to investigate for your family's education.
And we have a question of how young do you present power of predators? So we normally start middle school and high school. So there are a few curriculums that are in development that are specifically for elementary and young children. So there's some that talk about kind of healthy consent and healthy touch for elementary schools, but for power of predators specifically, that's middle school and high school students. All right, so we have about 2 minutes left. If we have any additional questions for community members, if anything else that you want to ask our team, I'll give it about a minute here. But for just our panelists, is there any other pieces that you feel like would be important for community members to take away of this conversation? We've talked about starting with healthy conversations, finding out, having that dialogue with your student or child of what's on their phone, what are they interested in, start looking into kind of those apps, maybe doing a little bit of your own research to find out what protections can you add, but then also how do you have those conversations with your kids. We've talked a little bit about some of the things to talk about with your student or child is that, the consequences. For a child, their brain has not fully developed some of that rational processing and doesn't fully develop till they're about 26. So that's kind of where you can step in and say, hey, let's do a step-by-step, talk through consequences. If you send out your nude image to somebody, how do you guarantee that they're not going to share it with somebody else? What would the potential side effects be? Are you okay with everybody seeing your image at school? Is that something you are comfortable with? Is that something you're not? If not, what can you do about it? Having some of those conversations and help your student kind of process. Some of the key people that we talk to, school counselors are a great resource. Talking to law enforcement, any law enforcement person can help guide you to the right person and connection. So that's a little overview of what we've talked about today. Any panelist wants to share any other pieces that they feel like would be good takeaways?
I think your overall awareness, regardless if it's any crime prevention or activity, your overall awareness and staying engaged, and that healthy spot to say, if something went in the wrong direction, that I'm here to help you, or there are others here to help you. And please include the police department as that resource. I think we sometimes have that image of coming up hard and gruff, and oh my goodness, we're all mostly moms and dads here too, with children of our own that really empathize with the struggles that our children are facing online, socially, and with the use that's needed with today's technology. So please don't hesitate to reach out to your local police department if necessary and have that conversation, and we'll get you in the right direction as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, my philosophy as a prosecutor is just to find that is to do the right thing, find the right solution. And, as somebody with, 2 girls of his own, 6 and 8 years old, I'm on the precipice of all this, and listening to all this makes my blood pressure raise a little bit, but we're, and Michelle's right. I mean, we're the resource, and Michelle and others in other jurisdictions and other police departments, they're trained for this situation, and they're trained to help, and Rachel's trained to help and to do all these things. And what's been great for me listening to this is just different perspectives. I'm not a social worker, and to hear Rachel's perspective and her background and analyzing all this, I mean, it's so good just for me to listen as a parent of 2 girls about this too, these groups are good, just to have this community awareness and to have these groups and to be talking about this in the open. It's a really good thing for, I think, the community, and to be aware of all these things.
The phrase that I teach any client I've ever worked with, adult to 3-year-old, is I hear you. And as a parent using that phrase with your kid when they're expressing how they feel about something or how they thought about something. You're not assuming you know it. You're just saying, I hear what you're saying. And I think that can be really powerful as a kid to hear your parent being like, yeah, I'm listening, I'm on your side. Because, you know, parents, we see the light at the end of the tunnel. We know this is going to be okay. We know that things are going to work out and your kid's going to be fine. And for the teenagers, this is the biggest thing that's ever happened to them. And sometimes we forget it and we just glance right over it because, you know, we've been through it. But I think Ashley said it a bunch. Meet them where they're at. Let them know that you are there and you're on their team and they're not doing it alone.
Awesome. Well, we've hit the 8 o'clock mark. Thank you all so much for joining us today. For parents, if you want to, or community members or students or youth or whoever's joining us today, if you want a curriculum like Power Over Predators, feel free. We have an application form, just like a little speaker request form on our website, www.castmn.org. We'd love to get it in, even if it's just a group of friends, so that you can say, hey, as a group of parents, as a group of community members, as a group of students, we want to know what Power Over Predators is so we can advocate for it. Like, we'd love to present it to you, to schools, to youth groups. We just believe it's valuable information, so we want to share it. So if that's something you're interested in, please feel free to check out our website. It also has upcoming events. We will be at Woodbury Days too, so if you want to stop by at the end of August to hang out with us there, we'll do awareness wheels, we'll have prizes and resources and tools, and you can talk with us in person. We'd love to connect with you there. But thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to our incredible panelists for your time. I'm so glad to have each of your perspectives here with us. And yeah, so everybody take care and have a beautiful evening. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.